So, you want to be a concept artist, but never quite developed the necessary technical skills, so you end up feeling like you're falling behind the industry and you're looking for that magical tutorial to save you? Well, look no further because I'm going to show you the fastest way to create original concepts with AI. We are going to be using Automatic1111, along with the ControlNET extension and good old Photoshop. This tutorial is meant for those who have some knowledge of these technologies, but if you don't, I recommend you to browse one of the many available tutorials on YouTube on how to set up before starting this course. Without further ado, let's begin. It's worth mentioning that we aim to create something original and simply use AI as a supporting tool, mainly for creating fast and realistic-looking textures and save a ton of time in the painting process. I'll still be adding time-lapsed bits of my Photoshop process before putting it into Automatic1111. But feel free to skip these parts if you are familiar. One key factor to look at in this part is making sure you have 2 to 3 different line thicknesses on your sketch, as it will be important for the next step of the process. I'm using a simple grid to sort of ground my concept and give me a sense of perspective, and as for the rest is pretty much self-explanatory. My first export of the sketch is in 512x512px as I find it giving the best results, but feel free to experiment. And now we're moving into the next step, which is generating a fill. Here we are in Automatic1111 in the Text-to-Image tab, and to save some time, I'll be using a custom-made prompt style. And for this experimental stage, I usually use Euler-A sampling method as it's very fast and gives quality results with a low step count. But before even starting, make sure that your ControlNET extension is up to date, which can be seen in the Extensions tab. If everything is in order, then your layout should look like this. And for hard surface concepts, I mainly use the Canny preprocessor, along with its designated model named the same. The main features we are going to look at is the control weight, which basically controls how much the mask, which is the sketch we attached, binds or affects the generated outcome. Another feature is the starting and ending control step, which basically means that if you set it to 2, then for the first 20% steps in the generation process, it will ignore the mask and vice versa. We're going to leave these 2 on default. Once we have all of that set up, I'm just going to put the CFG scale on 8 for start, and in my case, I'm using a custom checkpoint for the main model, but for this tutorial, I highly recommend you to start with StableDiffusion, as you will get very similar results and can be found on Civitai, which can be seen on the top left. I'm running a simple test just to show you how the Canny mask looks like, and you can see that it very nicely grasps the overall sketch and adds a pretty accurate fill. With that, I'm setting the first batch count on 20. Once it finished, I chose my top 5 generations, and I'm going to continue in Photoshop with the last one, but oftentimes I combine a couple of outcomes together with my sketch. Now, as you can see, by just adding our sketch on top, you would already have a decent-looking result and a better idea about your concept. But I'm still going to continue with a very simple cleanup of the fill, because the next step will be putting this outcome into the Image-to-Image tab, where the actual fill plays a role unlike before, with just the outlines of the sketch. So we really want all of the interesting and important elements of the concept to be well distinguished between each other, but I still don't worry too much about the details because we will take care of them in the upcoming steps. I am quite satisfied with how this looks, and now it's time to generate some cool-looking photorealistic texture. I'm continuing by adding it in the Image to Image tab, but with a different round of settings this time. I am setting it on higher resolution of 1024 pixels and going with the DPM plus SDE Keras sampling method, which is quite slower but generates far better quality results, and also setting the step count to around 60 steps. In the ControlNET panel, we are going with the same principle, but with a lower control weight, as we want a bit more freedom in the outcome. After I'm setting the denoising strength to 0.6 with a 5.5 CFG scale. The prompt isn't as important in this step, and it's left the same as before. Just take a look at this beautiful, raw-looking texture and how much character it adds to the concept. Imagine how long it would take you to paint this manually. And now I'm simply going to repeat the same thing we did before in Photoshop by adding the sketch on top of the texture so that it adds more context to the concept and export it in 1280 x 720 pixels. And with that, we move on to the next step, the in-painting tool. After adding the exported image into the In Painting tab, we start off by painting in the area which we'd like to generate some new ideas for. I am also adding a new prompt which will affect the new generation by simply replacing it with the front part of my existing style. I recommend having some weight on the prompt as well, so that it has a larger impact. An interesting feature which I use is shifting between the original or latent noise settings. When selecting original, it blends the generation with our reference, but upon selecting latent noise, it generates noise completely unrelated to the reference. It can often be useful, but we will stick with original for now. The sampling method and steps stay the same, but I reduce the resolution as it's quite difficult to experiment with these settings. You can see how the in-painting tool is very powerful for idea generating. It helps you to quickly visualize which element might fit, or even be directly blended with the concept. So I repeated the same action on a couple of areas which I found lacking in interest, and playing with the settings along the way to see if I get some better or faster results. By the way, I am not using ControlNET in this step because often the mask disrupts the outcome as it binds the new generation with the reference. After a couple of batches later, I have selected some of the most potential outcomes for this side panel of my concept, and after many tries, only managed to get one decent result for the wheels, but I really like how it interpreted the tank-like tracks. Finally, we can move all of these generations into Photoshop and start piecing it all together with our concept. So we have our texture ready along with the sketch on top still serving as a guide. I'm adding a merged layer of all of my freshly generated elements and going to start blending it all together. It will be another time lapse, so feel free to skip to the final step. Or if you like these types of things, I will crank up the music for you and enjoy watching. At this point, the concept is already looking functional and all the elements are properly in place. We can confidently move on to the final step of this course. We are in the Image-to-Image tab, and for this final step I am using a new checkpoint called Realistic Vision because it has a highly photorealistic style, so I'm adding some additional prompts that are more fitting to this style. The step count is set quite higher as we want a high-definition result, and the sampling method is DPM plus SDE Keras. At this point, feel free to play with the denoising strength and CFG as you like. I am also adding the reference to the ControlNET panel, but this time the weight is also much higher, because we want to retain as much of the reference as possible. The sampling method is still canny. You've reached the end of this course, and hopefully by now I've managed to convince you to include these tools into your workflow for the future. The AI wave is ever evolving, and I, for one, am excited to see how we could utilize it and make our lives easier. And in this case, focus on actually bringing concepts to life and enjoying the beauty of experimenting faster and more efficiently. There's a lot more that we can do with these tools, so if you like this video, please subscribe and I will make sure I make more content like this in the future. Feel free to let me know in the comments if there is anything specific you'd like to see in the AI sphere. Ciao, ciao.